Welcome in, everybody. I'm Reed Cowan. So breaking news and a breakthrough to report today. Americans held in Russia about to go home. And it is a heartland head-to-head between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in the race for the White House. Plus, we'll take you to the southern border of the United States with Mexico, where the Trump campaign talks immigration. This is CBS News 24/7. Let's go. Okay, right off the top, our live monitors take us to Houston, Texas, where Vice President Kamala Harris will very soon deliver a eulogy today for the late Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She will follow the words of the man you see here on the screen in front of me, former President Bill Clinton, who is right now addressing that congregation, paying tribute to that former lawmaker in the United States. We're going to take you back to Texas shortly, but first we have to get to that breaking news. The U.S. and Russia completing their biggest prisoner swap in post-Soviet history. This is a look right now from Turkey's capital where that exchange happened. This exchange will bring Americans wrongfully detained by the Russian government home after months of negotiations. So we know right now 3 Americans held in Russian prisons are on their way home, wheels up as we speak. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, Marine veteran Paul Whelan, and Russian-American radio journalist Alsu Kermasheva. We just heard from President Biden touting this success. Listen.
This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time. The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. And I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter. And today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world. Friends you can trust, work with, and depend upon.
President Biden there not only saying this is a major success, but punctuating the importance of allies. And we are in real time tracking a wide range of reactions to this release. First of all, Paul Whelan's family, who have been without him for so many months. They released this statement saying, in part, quote, "Paul Whelan is free. Our family is grateful to the United States government for making Paul's freedom a reality." They went on to say, "We'd like to thank President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, and National Security Advisor Sullivan for their engagement with the Russian Federation to create the environment where Paul's freedom became a possibility." We've also heard from the Wall Street Journal, where Evan Gershkovich is a reporter. That paper says, in part, quote, "Evan and his family have displayed unrivaled courage, resilience, and poise during this ordeal, which came to an end because of broad advocacy for his release around the world." CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us live now. Ed, you were just in the room with President Biden. Yes, this was political, but that announcement also felt personal. So let's talk about the pieces on the board, so to speak. How did this swap come together, Ed?
It's been in the works for quite a while, Reed, and it involved, as you've reported there, 7 different countries and some pretty significant diplomacy by several senior U.S. officials and the vice president, speaking with counterparts in Germany, in Russia, in Turkey, and those Eastern European countries involved in today's swap. The president making clear in those White House comments just a little while ago that this is a personal and very important issue for him, given the element of family, that there are families that are still hoping for the return of their loved ones, and now, in this case, 4 on their way back to the United States tonight. The president also, in those remarks, you'll notice, touted the importance of alliances and of diplomacy. That is a direct repudiation of the previous administration and former President Donald Trump's attempts to get back to the White House. You heard him asked. President Trump has said that he could get Evan Gershkovich back. The president said, well, then why didn't he do so when he was president? Gershkovich was captured after Trump was out of office, but the point being there are dozens of Americans detained overseas. If the previous administration was serious about it, they should have done something about it. We are expecting that the president will head, as he said in his remarks, to Joint Base Andrews here outside of Washington later today when those families return home to greet them personally. And it's also notable that the White House and other U.S. officials have called out two details that speak to the political moment we're in, Reed. First of all, that the president himself was making calls on that fateful Sunday afternoon when he announced to the world that he would not be running again for re-election, speaking with his Slovenian counterpart just an hour before that tweet that released the letter telling the world of his intentions. The other is that the vice president, during recent travels to Europe, was in direct talks with the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, about some of the details of this to try to compel the German government to consent to this agreement that required releasing a key Russian national from a German prison. All of it designed to sort of say, look, for those that had doubts that the president can do the job as president, there he was doing it, even in his hour of greatest political peril. And for those of you wondering about the vice president and her utility when it comes to foreign affairs, she too was directly involved in these negotiations at key points to get Germany to come along.
She's also echoed in recent minutes what Secretary of State Blinken has said, which is we are going to vow to continue getting Americans home who are wrongfully detained, not only in Russia, but in other countries as well. Do you think this will embolden them to be able to continue to push for more Americans to be released?
Oh, that work continues on a daily basis, Reed. There are several Americans known to be detained in countries all over the world. There may be cases, frankly, that are not as well publicized just yet. But there is an entire office at the State Department that focuses on this. It's a major priority for the president and his National Security Council. And in this case, the CIA was involved because of its relationships with Russian spy agencies. So it remains a top-of-mind goal of this president, and the kind of action exhibited today, the bold move to get several countries on the same page to make this happen, is the kind of work, at least in the foreign policy space, we should anticipate will continue in the closing months of the president's term. Now that he doesn't have to worry about his own political future. Remember, he signaled in his remarks that he would be working on big things domestically and in the foreign space. This is certainly a good example of that, and there are several more cases yet to come of detained Americans in Russia and elsewhere.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much for that. So CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Goss is live on the stream with us right now. You just heard Ed talk about this multinational approach and the foreign space and the political significance of that. How did this all come together? Which nations really stepped forward to work with the Biden administration?
Sure, Reed. Well, the U.S. officials who are intimately involved in these negotiations have described them as the most complex in U.S.-Russian history and even including U.S.-Soviet history, when, as we know, spy swaps hit a crescendo. And the reason for that, as you and Ed were discussing, is because of the sheer number of players, countries involved, and also because of the types of prisoners. These are not spies. These are political prisoners that Russia is trying to wrangle and extract concessions from other countries from. So we've learned since this news broke that half a dozen countries involved: U.S., Russia, Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, Turkey as the site of the swap. 3 U.S. citizens and 1 legal permanent resident going to set foot this evening on U.S. soil. 12 German nationals or Russian political dissidents heading to Germany. And yes, 8 Russian nationals making their way back home to Moscow. Among them, somebody that the Russians have wanted for a long, long time, convicted murderer and former FSB agent Vadim Krasikov, who has been serving a life sentence in a German prison. You heard President Biden speak to the importance of the relationship with Germany and other allies, and thank Olaf Scholz in particular for making a concession, because that was the key, we are told, to unlocking this entire constellation that has led to the freedom of U.S. prisoners now.
Yeah, the German chancellor getting a lot of praises sung by President Joe Biden. Okay, thank you so much for that conversation. When we come back, CBS News 24/7 streaming coast to coast and worldwide, we have our eyes on the world. Americans coming home, how the deal came together, the political implications, and also the personal implications for those who will come home to U.S. soil very soon. We're back after the break. Welcome back. We continue following the headline you will be hearing now and throughout dinner time, at least: the release of Americans wrongfully detained in Russian prisons. how the deal came together, reaction from the families of those released, some after thousands of days in captivity, and then, of course, the political implications here in the United States and around the world. Let's talk about that political component to the story. Keep in mind, we are less than 100 days to the presidential election in the United States, and the Biden administration very much wanted to claim success in getting these Americans home, and you saw that from the president when he addressed the media just a moment ago. Now, we're also waiting to see if Vice President Kamala Harris will have anything to say about this deal. You're looking live right now. This is in Texas, where the funeral is happening for the late Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. We understand the vice president will be taking to that mic in about an hour from now. As soon as she does, we will know if she has anything to say beyond the statement that she put out before all of this happened today in Texas about the release of these hostages. But CBS News politics reporter Zach Hudak joins us live from D.C. You know, the Biden-Harris administration, we know this. They will use this as a score, a feather in their cap as they're out on the campaign trail to say, look, Kamala Harris has the ability to take credit for success on the national stage.
Reed, that's exactly right, and we're already seeing the White House point to the role that VP Harris played in this prisoner swap. They're pointing to some of the conversations she had while at a security forum in Munich, and pointing to other roles she played helping get this done. And Reed, what this illustrates is a really interesting dynamic that's developing here, where we have President Biden, who quite obviously is very concerned about his legacy. He has had to step aside before he really felt that he was done with what he wanted to do. But at the same time, we have now a new presumptive nominee who he is directly connected to. So this White House has a tension where they have to try to do two things. They have to try to establish a strong, positive legacy for President Biden as he leaves office. But while doing that, they also have to find ways to give credit to VP Harris, to strengthen her, and try to give her some of the strengths he had without letting her carry some of the weaknesses he had.
Trying to tie her to this win for sure. Okay, so they're really in first things first mode where the Harris campaign is concerned. Let's drill down on that. First of all, they have to make her the nominee for the Democratic Party. That hasn't happened yet before they can announce a running mate. But let's talk about something that's happening with delegates today.
So, Reed, we began today at 9 a.m. a virtual roll call, and that is the delegates doing what we typically see at the convention. They are basically formally nominating VP Harris. That's going to go on for a few days and won't end until likely early next week. But it's going to take until then, until we get a VP nomination.
Zach,
there are several
I'm so sorry to have to cut in. Zach, I'm so sorry to have to cut in. Our producers are wanting us to get to the White House, where they're giving a press briefing right now. Zach, we appreciate that so much. Zach talking about those delegates getting a chance to signal what could end up being Kamala Harris becoming the nominee. Let's listen into the White House press briefing room. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
To bring your loved ones home where they belong. And with that, I will turn it over to our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan.
Thank you, Karine, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, as you've seen and heard from the President and from Karine, we've completed one of the largest and certainly the most complex exchange in history. And Paul Whelan, Evan Gershkovich, Alsu Kermasheva, and Vladimir Kara-Murza, 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder, are finally coming home. I have the honor and pleasure of joining the President this morning in the Oval Office as he shared the wonderful news with the families. And then together, they spoke with Paul, Evan, Alsu, and Vladimir, who are on the tarmac in Ankara with U.S. officials where the exchange happened. To say that everyone in the room was overjoyed, even at a loss for words, is an understatement. Since taking office, President Biden and Vice President Harris have made clear that they will not stop working until every American wrongfully detained or held hostage around the world is reunited with their family. As an administration, we're proud to celebrate the return home of over 70 such Americans from places around the world like Afghanistan, Burma, Gaza, Haiti, Iran, Russia, Venezuela, Rwanda, and elsewhere. Today's exchange is a feat of diplomacy that honestly could only be achieved by a leader like Joe Biden. At his direction, the professionals in our national security, foreign policy, and intelligence community worked tirelessly and relentlessly to secure the release of 16 individuals who were detained in Russia. The 3 American citizens, 1 American green card holder, 5 German citizens, and 7 Russian political prisoners in exchange for 8 individuals held in a combination of the United States, Germany, Norway, Slovenia, and Poland. The president was himself personally engaged in the diplomacy that brought this about, including multiple conversations with Chancellor Scholz, with the other leaders of the countries who provided some of the Russians as part of the exchange, and most recently, as has now been reported, calling the Prime Minister of Slovenia early in the afternoon of Sunday, July 21st, to coordinate the final arrangements, to make the final piece of this deal fall into place. There is no more singular or concrete demonstration that the alliances that the President has reinvigorated around the world matter to Americans, to the individual safety of Americans, and to the collective security of Americans. And we're deeply grateful to our allies who supported us in these complex negotiations to achieve this outcome. And while I'm standing at this podium, the President is reaching out to give personal thanks to the leaders of Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey. And honestly, guys, I can just say this was vintage Joe Biden, rallying American allies to save American citizens and Russian freedom fighters, and doing it with intricate statecraft, pulling his whole team together to drive this across the finish line. Are enduring an unimaginable ordeal. From the President on down, we've stayed in regular and routine touch with them. I spent a lot of time with the families of Evan and Paul and Alsu. Most of the time, as you can imagine, those are tough conversations. But not today. Today, excuse me. Today was a very good day. And we're going to build on it, drawing inspiration and continued courage from it for all of those who are held hostage or wrongfully detained around the world. And that includes Mark Fogel, who we are actively working to get his release from Russia as well. And there are others being held in Syria, Afghanistan, other countries around the world who we are working to get released. And just on a personal note, I want to say that this is the culmination of a monumental level of effort and level of skill by my teammates across the national security enterprise. My colleagues here at the NSC, my colleagues at the Central Intelligence Agency, my colleagues at the State Department. These are dedicated, talented professionals who are not in the headlines, who don't get to stand at a podium like this one. And it was at the President's direction that they built and pulled off the most intricate, expansive deal of its kind in memory. So they know who they are. I salute them. And every American should be proud to have those kind of people standing up on their behalf and on behalf of American security. While this has unfolded, we've been closely monitoring the events in the Middle East as well. Since October 7th, we have worked to deter and prevent escalation into a wider regional war. That risk has always been there. That risk is there now. And we are determined to engage in deterrence, defense, and de-escalation to try to ensure that we do not have a wider regional conflict or escalation that goes unchecked. So I'm happy to get more into that in response to your questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. Whose idea was it to try to go big and bring everyone home at once instead of going for a simpler one-for-one type deal, and why?
That's a great question, which I don't feel entirely comfortable answering because this was an organic process involving a lot of people across our government. But what I will say is this. The President sat us down on a regular basis over the course of the detentions of Paul, Evan, and Alsu, and really pushed us to think about what configuration would actually work to make this happen. And it was through an iterative process of back and forth with various of the allies I mentioned, with engagements with our Russian counterparts, where we were making proposals, getting responses, that this all came together. And so I would say that if you had not had Joe Biden sitting in the Oval Office, I don't think this would have happened. But as I said in my remarks, there were a lot of other people who played a central role in building out the pieces of this and then executing on that. And the execution phase of this, to get this level of coordination together, to have those planes all land on the tarmac at the same time from multiple different countries with so many different individuals coming from Russia and going back to Russia, really extraordinary. And I think, team effort can be a cliche, but I think in this case it's a warranted description of what happened.
And was Alexei Navalny supposed to be a part of this deal before he died in prison?
So we had been working with our partners on a deal that would have included Alexei Navalny, and unfortunately he died. In fact, on the very day that he died, I saw Evan's parents, and I told them that the president was determined to get this done, even in light of that tragic news, and that we were going to work day and night to get to this day. And so that work continued over the course of the past few months and culminated in today. Yeah.
You've mentioned it a little bit, but can you describe and give us a little bit more color on that Oval Office conversation just before the president came out? Did all 4 Americans get to speak? Did each of the family members get to speak to their loved ones? Did the president tear up? Did you tear up?
I saved my tearing up for this podium. I would like to strike that from the record if we could. I don't know if that's permitted. Probably not. So the president invited the family members in at the moment that we received the word from the tarmac in Ankara that the exchange was complete. And he was able to give them the news directly that the exchange was in fact complete. Then Paul, Evan, and Alsu were in one place. Vladimir was actually in another place. So he conducted 2 calls from the Oval Office, one with the 3 American citizens on the phone, and he welcomed their freedom, said, that on behalf of the American people, he was so proud to have them out, and then very quickly turned the phone over to their family members, and each family got the opportunity to engage by phone with their loved one who was out. He then conducted a second call with Vladimir, and Vladimir's wife, one of their daughters, and their son were there to be able to speak with him. And the president and he also got to reminisce on the fact that they were both pallbearers together at John McCain's John McCain's funeral. And so it was a kind of extraordinary personal exchange in the Oval Office. And the family members were both overwhelmed, of course, by the events of the day and also standing there in the presence of the U.S. president at the Resolute desk. So it was quite a moment.
And can you talk about how the administration tries to make sure this doesn't incentivize more arrests of innocent Americans, beyond what the president said, advising people not to go abroad in certain places, especially because you're looking at this inherent imbalance between releasing or between securing the release of innocent Americans in exchange for rightfully convicted criminals, including a murder?
Look, it's a fair question. It's a question that we grapple with every time that we look at the hard decisions involved in one of these exchanges. It is difficult to send back a convicted criminal to secure the release of an innocent American. And yet, sometimes the choice is between doing that and consigning that person basically to live out their days in prison in a hostile foreign country or in the hands of a hostile power. So from our perspective, we have assessed and analyzed that risk, and we have judged that the benefit of reuniting Americans, of bringing people home, and also of vindicating the idea that the American government are going to do what it takes to protect and secure the release of innocent Americans, that benefit outweighs the risk, and that's how we have proceeded. I would point out, in addition to that in periods of time when the U.S. government didn't tend to do prisoner exchanges, Americans were unjustly detained and held hostage overseas. In periods where we did, Americans were unjustly detained and held hostage overseas. So I think there are real questions, and Roger Carstens, the hostage negotiator at the State Department, has actually pointed out that in this analysis, it is not quite as clear-cut that the evidence actually demonstrates the kind of result that your question speaks to, that a lot more people get taken because we do these exchanges. But it's something that we have to pay attention to, and it's something that makes these decisions by the president not simple decisions, hard decisions, and yet, as he did today, he was prepared to make them. Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more? When did it become clear that Krasikov was this linchpin to a deal like this? And was it during the negotiations over Brittany Griner?
When you're engaged in a negotiation and one side lays down a position, there's not like a light bulb moment when you say, okay, that position is immovable. That has to be tested, and alternatives have to be suggested, and proposals get put on the table and rejected, and new proposals and rejected. So it is less of a aha moment, okay, now we know, and it's more something that you accumulate through the experience of the negotiation. And so over the course of this negotiation, we did reach the conclusion that Krasikov was a key.
You've discussed, obviously, the president's involvement, direct involvement in all of this. Can you talk us through any involvement that the vice president had? Was she also speaking directly to other leaders and allies?
So, as I said in my opening comments, both President Biden and Vice President Harris have made the return of unjustly detained American hostages an absolute priority. And in this particular case, Vice President Harris actually had an opportunity to engage with Chancellor Scholz earlier this year at an opportune and timely moment at the Munich Security Conference, where she talked about this issue with him. That followed on a conversation that the President had just a short time before that, and it was in the run of high-level engagements and a back and forth that the President and the Chancellor were having that Vice President Harris was actually able to sit face-to-face with Chancellor Scholz and talk through the elements of this. And then I've sat in the Oval Office more times than I can count over the course of the past years, providing briefings and updates on this and getting peppered with questions by both the President and the Vice President, thinking through the strategy, iterating the approach, which she was a participant in very much, a core member of the team that helped make this happen.
Jay, two quick questions. One, as it relates to the President's interactions with Chancellor Scholz. It's been detailed to us, but maybe from the podium, if you could help us understand. Chancellor Scholz had to make a big sacrifice, giving up Krasikov here, a Russian criminal. What specifically did the German Chancellor say to President Biden about his willingness to do this?
Well, I will leave that to Chancellor Scholz because I think for important and sensitive conversations, leaders should speak for themselves.
The White House said, he said, for you, and then he said, I will do this. Is that fair? And if so, can you at least detail that?
I can confirm that he did say that, but I thought you were asking sort of to elaborate in greater detail, which I'm afraid I don't feel comfortable doing because he can speak to his conversations with the President. What I will say, and President Biden made this point when he spoke to the press just a short time ago, that relationship between the President and the Chancellor, a relationship of respect, a relationship of genuine friendship, had the character of being able to work through this sensitive issue in a way that wasn't antiseptic or professional. It was two guys actually trying to figure out a solution. That was the nature of all of the conversations, and ultimately the Chancellor was able to say to the President, let's do this.
Just to be clear, my second question, today is clearly a day of celebration, but already there is some criticism, including from the Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, who moments ago said, I think what this demonstrates, I think that really what this shows is that a lot of bad guys across the world are worried that Donald Trump is coming back into office. Your response to those comments?
I don't follow. Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. Can you talk about what, if any, engagement U.S. officials had with Vladimir Putin as part of this?
No engagement directly with Vladimir Putin.
What about his deputies?
There was extensive engagement with Russian officials over the course of this. I'm not going to get into the details because those channels are sensitive and need to be protected for exactly this reason, because having those sensitive channels enables us to produce results like today.
And then last week in the Oval Office, President Biden said that he remains committed to bringing Americans home during his final 6 months in office. How important was it for him to get this deal before leaving office?
Honestly, I don't think he was thinking about it like, I got to get it before I leave office. He was thinking about it from the family's perspective, which is every day is a lost day. So I want to do this as rapidly as humanly possible. I want to push the pace on it because the longer that these Americans are held abroad, the greater the risk and the greater the pain. So for him, it was really important to do the deal, but less tied to his time in office and more tied to the power and responsibility he had and wanted to exercise to get this done as fast as he possibly could. Yeah.
And I just want to follow up on this interaction with the Russians. I mean, does this in any way lay any groundwork for discussions about the war in Ukraine with the Ukrainians? I mean, just to sort of say, look, we've cooperated on this. Is there any path that this creates any sort of goodwill in terms of, creating more discussion?
We do not see a link between the hostage negotiation or the detained persons negotiations and any potential diplomacy over the war in Ukraine. We see those as operating on separate tracks. One is really about the practical issue of producing this exchange. The other is a much more complex question where the Ukrainians will be in the lead and the United States will consult closely with all of our allies to support them when they are prepared to step forward and engage in those in that kind of diplomacy.
Yep. Can I just follow up on, so we can't have you here and not ask you what was happening and unfolding in the Middle East and with Iran and with this the killing of Hania. Can you please just give us your assessment of how high the temperature really is and how great the risks are now of an all-out war or a bigger war?
Just taking a step back, we have been laser focused on trying to prevent that wider war since October 7th. There have been moments that have required intensive effort to keep a lid on things. The risk has always been there, and the risk remains today. And we believe we do have to be engaging in intensive efforts now through deterrence, through de-escalation, through diplomacy, to prevent a wider war, and we will continue to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Back in May, former President Trump made the comment that Russia would release Evan Gershkovich for him after the upcoming election, quote, but not for anyone else. Did that comment complicate negotiations at all, and do you have a response to Trump's comment now?
Look, I'm just happy these guys are out and home, and I won't wade into the comments of the former president.
Yeah. What about Jimmy Wilgus? Are you working on him?
Yeah.
Jake, you noted that the president spoke to the leader of Slovenia right around the time he was making his decision on his political future. How much was the thinking that he had to go through on his future part of this process leading up to these negotiations? Was this something that weighed on him for days ahead of these calls?
Look, to be honest with you, the way in which this unfolded played out over the course of weeks, even months, to put all of the pieces in place. So the timing and the cadence of the different elements coming together, feature of the diplomacy and the decision-making of each of the countries involved. It wasn't about American politics, the American political calendar, president's thinking on other issues. And it did happen to line up on that Sunday in that way, but not through a conscious decision to make it so, but rather because that's when the pieces were falling into place. And that's the moment when the president had to drop that final piece in. And it just so happened to come a couple of hours before he made his announcement.
And when do you think we will actually see them on American soil? Will the president greet them in person?
I think you can expect to see Evan, Paul, and Alsu later tonight on American soil. And as the president mentioned in his remarks earlier, they'll be landing at Andrews Air Force Base. The president and the vice president will be out there to greet them. Vladimir Kara-Murza is going to be traveling to Germany, and his family, who was here with the president this morning, will be traveling there to join him. But as Vladimir and the president discussed today, we expect him back here in the United States soon for him to be able to see the president and other people in the U.S. government. Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. Switching gears for a moment, I want to ask you about the plea deal that was reached with 9/11 suspects by military courts down in Guantanamo. Republicans are condemning this as showing weakness and calling it a sweetheart deal because it avoids a trial and the death penalty. I was wondering if the administration has any response to that.
As we said last night, the White House received word that the convening authority had entered these pretrial agreements that had been negotiated by military prosecutors with KSM and some of the other 9/11 defendants. And we had no role in that process. The president had no role. The vice president had no role. I had no role. had no role, and we were informed yesterday, the same day that they went out publicly, that this pretrial agreement had been accepted by the convening authority. What the president did upon learning of that was direct his team to consult as appropriate with officials and lawyers at the Department of Defense on this matter. Those consultations are ongoing, and I have nothing more to add at this time.
And one more thing on Iran, Israel, Hamas negotiations. Now that the lead Hamas negotiator is dead, who is there to negotiate with, and why, in your estimation, would Hamas continue towards negotiating a ceasefire deal when their lead negotiator was just killed by the people they're negotiating with?
It is too soon to tell what the impact of his death will have on the negotiations, and so I'm not going to speculate on that, especially in light of the broader dynamics and set of events unfolding in the region right now. What I will say is this: the ceasefire and hostage deal is the pathway to ending this war. It is the pathway to getting all of the hostages home, including the American citizen hostages who are relentlessly focused on getting home, and we remain determined to get it done. Yeah.
Did the president have a call today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, or is he having one?
I believe the Israeli government has put out that they're having a call. We had not announced that yet, but in fact, the president is intending to speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu later today. They have not spoken yet. Yeah.
And is the president going to express any displeasure about not having a heads up about the attack on the Hamas leader, or these other big things that have happened in the last few days with Israel taking countermeasures?
So I'm not going to preview the president's message before he has a chance to speak directly to the prime minister, and then if I had to predict, I probably will be tight-lipped about the readout afterward. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. I just wondered if you could make clear for us, when was the actual moment when you really knew that this deal was going to be done and that it was sealed, or was that not really until today and you actually saw them? The released people on the tarmac in Ankara?
We steadily gained confidence following the president's call on the 21st of July, but that confidence was always tempered by the reality that this was a fragile deal, a complex deal that could fall apart at any moment from multiple different directions. So we held our breath and crossed our fingers until just a couple hours ago. Yeah.
Jake, I wanted to ask about arms control treaties. It seems like Russia's been backsliding when it comes to these deals. What is the update with that? Is there any progress with getting them to rejoin any of these treaties?
No. The short answer is there is no progress. And I have publicly stated, and my colleagues have also laid out our view, that there is an arms control agenda that's in the interests of the security of the United States, our allies, and frankly, global stability. And we have not seen reciprocity on the Russian side to engage in those discussions at this time. So we're obviously working very closely with NATO, with our other allies and partners, to ensure that our security is going to be strong, resilient, and credible no matter what comes next. But we do remain available to engage in arms control, as we did with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. Last question. Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. Can you just confirm that no money was exchanged, no sanctions were loosened to facilitate this deal?
Yes, I can confirm that.
And can you also speak to why the president chose not to use his moment in front of the cameras to deliver a warning to Putin? He said, I don't need to speak to Putin, but what he didn't convey was a price that countries will pay if they abduct Americans for political purposes.
We have made clear through every conceivable channel, and the president has made clear publicly on repeated occasions over the last 2 years about the costs and consequences of aggression, standing against United States interests, and of taking actions that we believe are unlawful and unjust. We're going to continue to do that as we go forward. For the president today, this was a moment to thank our allies. It was a moment to celebrate the families, and most importantly, it was a moment to lift up the human achievement of getting both Americans, citizens of friendly countries, and Russian political prisoners out. But as the president said, he doesn't need to talk to Putin for Putin to understand where the president stands. Thank you.
What about Jimmy Wilgus? He's been there 8 years.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
8 years.
All right. As I mentioned at the top, this is an incredibly important day, monumentous day, and also an emotional day for the families, obviously, for the incredible team that I get to work with every day, national security team, and across the administration, and for this president. And so it's a good day. It's a really, really good day. And we should be really proud of what this administration has been able to do. Now these, these folks who are unjustly held now get to go home to their families and see their families and restart their lives. Okay.
A follow-up on the 9/11 plea deal, if I may. Does the president still plan to close Guantanamo Bay Prison before he leaves office? And is there a realistic pathway to do that in the next 6 months?
That's still something that the president wants to do and get done. As far as a timeline, don't have anything for you here, but obviously this is something that he wanted to be done under his administration. Just don't have anything else to read out or preview at this time, but it is something that he's determined to get done.
And does he have a message to some of the 9/11 families?
You've been listening to word from the White House on what was a multinational effort to bring people home, people unjustly held in Russia, in Russian prisons, not the least of which Americans who are wheels up right now. This story playing out on personal fronts and political fronts. You just heard from the White House a personal account and the personal feelings of what it was like to get word that these Americans were wheels up and on their way, as President Joe Biden said, almost home. They'll be arriving in the United States sometime tonight. CBS News will bring you those reunions as soon as our cameras can really get on that. But also talking from the White House about the political implications of this and how this is really the Biden-Harris administration owning the win, planting the flag in this. When we come back, CBS News 24/7 has questions about the prisoners who were released to Russia. What's in it for Russia? More when we return. CBS News 24/7 with continuing coverage of this breaking news. The U.S. and Russia complete a prisoner swap that's going to bring Americans wrongfully detained home. We're talking about Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, Marine veteran Paul Whelan, who was there for more than 2,000 days, and Russian-American radio journalist Alsu Kurmasheva, all on their way home right now in an airplane bound for the United States. We just heard from President Joe Biden about all of this. Let's listen in.
It says a lot about the United States that we work relentlessly to free Americans who are unjustly held around the world. It also says a lot about us that this deal includes the release of Russian political prisoners. They stood up for democracy and human rights. Their own leaders threw them in prison. The United States helped secure their release as well. That's who we are in the United States. We stand for freedom, for liberty, for justice, not only for our own people, but for others as well. Deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans at home and abroad. And so we'll continue to work for the release of all wrongfully detained Americans around the world. In just a few hours, we'll welcome home our fellow Americans. We're looking forward to that. God willing, we're going to be out at Andrews and get that done. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is a good day.
A good day. And, you know, they talk about the release of Americans and others who belong to other countries. But also let's keep in mind that they had to give up some prisoners as well, some Russian prisoners who are seen on the national stage as bad guys. So let's bring in CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer. Elizabeth, want to bring you in here and talk to you about this swap. What was in it for Russia? And can you characterize who we had to give up and who other nations had to give up to get this deal done?
Yes, because it's important to underline that some of these people were imprisoned elsewhere, and so it required the diplomatic cooperation of lots of countries in order to get this very complex deal done. Top of the list is the person that we've been talking about for some time. His name is Vadim Krasikov, and we've been talking about him because he was sort of at the top of the list, top of Russia's want list. He is an FSB colonel. He's an intelligence intelligence officer who assassinated a Chechen fighter. He sneaked into Germany in 2019 with false documents, waited in a park, and in broad daylight shot this ex-Chechen fighter with a Glock pistol in a Berlin park. The Germans were very reluctant to give him up, but in the end, they did agree. The second one is Vadim Konoschenok, who had been extradited to the U.S. from Estonia. So he was in the U.S., and he was facing charges in an American court of money laundering on behalf of the Russian government, but more seriously conspiring to provide sensitive American-made electronics and ammunition to Russia. So he's going back. Vladislav Klushin, a Russian businessman who was convicted in the U.S. and sentenced to 9 years in Boston on securities fraud based on information he'd stolen from U.S. computer networks. But he'd also, by the judge, been ordered to pay $34 million. So he's probably headed back to Russia extra relieved because he's not going to have to do that. And finally, two Russian spies, another couple who required the cooperation of a European country, in this case Slovenia. They had their names were the Doltsevs, and they'd been working undercover in Slovenia, pretending to be Argentinian to the extent that they even spoke Spanish to their kids, but their brief for Russia was gathering information on America's European allies. They'd been convicted. They actually pleaded guilty just a short while ago, and now Slovenia has given them up, and they'll be on their way home. So you see, it's quite a range of people that Russia is getting back, and I think for President Putin, the important ones will be the KGB colonel, because he's always very anxious to demonstrate to the intelligence community in Russia, his power base, that he's going to stick with them, and so this is going to go over very well with the home crowd.
Perhaps an oversimplification, but if people were trading cards, these were cards that were talked about for months back and forth. We are mindful that many more Americans are being held overseas in Russia and elsewhere. If people are playing cards, if we're sort of using that analogy, does the American government have other cards that we can play to try to bring more people home?
I did a little tally, and it looks as if there are 7 more Americans in Russia. 6 of them are in jail on criminal charges. Now, the Russian justice system is not really fit for purpose, so it's quite likely that the cases against them are dubious. But and the charges range from possessing marijuana to hitting a policeman while drunk on a train. They are not being brought home. In some cases, their sentences are shorter, so they'll be heading home soon-ish. But there are a lot of heartbroken families tonight who aren't going to get their loved ones, American loved ones, back. There's one person who stands out, Ksenia Karolina. She's from Los Angeles. She was picked up in Russia and accused of, well, she faces treason charge, unbelievably, which is maybe the most serious charge, carries a sentence of at least 20 years. And her sin or crime appears to have been giving some money, as little as $50 maybe, to some fund that supports the Ukrainian military. Her fate is unknown, and at the moment, very sadly and worryingly, her trial is also on pause.
And her family very vocal on CBS News in recent months as well. Elizabeth Palmer, thank you so much for that comprehensive report. We appreciate you so much. So let's talk about the human angle to this. Paul Whelan's family, they're speaking out. They released a statement saying in part, quote, "Paul Whelan is free. Our family is grateful to the United States government for making Paul's freedom a reality." They went on to say, "We would like to thank President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, and National Security Advisor Sullivan for their engagement with the Russian Federation to create the environment where Paul's freedom became a reality." We've also heard from the Wall Street Journal, where Evan Gershkovich is a reporter. That paper saying in part, quote, "Evan and his family have displayed unrivaled courage, resilience, and poise during this ordeal, which came to an end because of the broad advocacy for his release around the world." Of course, in the hours to come, you will see on CBS News and on streaming the return of these hostages back to American soil. President Joe Biden said he had a chance before they were wheels up to say, "Welcome almost home." As soon as we see their return, you will see it on all of our various platforms. Families reunited, and then the emerging story, that personal story of them starting their lives over, as also the political story emerges. The Biden-Harris administration wanting to own the win as they face keeping the White House. That's it for us at CBS News 24/7. Thank you so much for staying with us. We appreciate you day in and day out. You have a great day.